So we just said, screw it. Like, we're making our own thing. So we're going to call it our own thing. And a lot of consumers don't know what Tennessee High Malt is.
You're listening to Barrel Talk, a podcast diving deep into what drives leaders in the whiskey industry. My name is Kevin Bridge. I'm a photographer and whiskey enthusiast. I'm sitting down with people who dedicated their lives to whiskey to hear their stories and why they're so passionate about their craft. Making something that's authentically your hometown isn't easy, especially when you have to change the law to do it. But that's exactly the challenge our first guest faced when starting his distillery in 2011. Tim Piersant is the owner and co-founder of Chattanooga Whiskey, and as you'll hear, it's always been about representing Chattanooga, Tennessee in a way that makes sense. Let's start at the beginning. So you guys were founded in 2011,
Yep.
You and your former partner.
Yep.
Why whiskey? What was it that was like, I want to start a distillery?
The history of whiskey, it was discovering that, finding the pre-prohibition documentation of all the distilleries in downtown, being born and raised in Chattanooga. My co-founder, former partner, being born and raised in Chattanooga. Chattanooga was electric from kind of the beginnings of an entrepreneurial community, or the revitalization of an entrepreneurial community, I should say, and being able to bring that back to Chattanooga for the first time in 100 years, or that challenge, anyways. The challenge of bringing it back was really exciting. The branding around it, the storytelling around it, and the craft distillery, craft whiskey boom. You could feel it coming. It was at the very beginning. Obviously, a lot of people were drinking bourbon in 2011. Some people credit Mad Men for that. We were watching Mad Men, and it was the whole package, really. It wasn't a family history. It wasn't, like a long time passion of mine to do. But the package of bringing it back and everything that came along with it, and that excitement in downtown Chattanooga is the reason why.
Now, you said you're from Chattanooga, and you also mentioned that there hasn't been a distillery in Chattanooga before then for 100 years. And there was a reason for that, because it was illegal. So why? I understand that it was your hometown, but why? It would have been very easy to start up a distillery and start making whiskey anywhere else without having to change any laws. So why? What was it that made you like, okay, Chattanooga's the place, we're going to change the laws to get this to happen?
Well, because that's where the history was, and that's where we lived, and that was the story, and the community. We felt like the community was going to really get behind it. And that was the opportunity. We knew it was going to be challenging. We didn't know it was going to be as challenging as it ended up being. But that's what, made it fun and exciting, is just having these conversations and tackling these things every single day, talking to new people, and, pushing, just continuing to push the envelope. There's actually several counties in Tennessee around us where distilling was legal, but they were very, very rural counties. And in order to really do something, building something, we could have built something and taken like a small building somewhere, or built a small building and done it, 30 miles away, and probably would have, been okay, but that wasn't the mission, and that didn't excite us. And changing the laws excited us, and So yeah, I mean, and nobody else really did either. I mean, there weren't distilleries in those other counties, and there were only a few distilleries in the whole state of Tennessee. And so it was just, you know, that, like I said, it just wasn't the vision. We wanted to bring back the history that was once here. And we knew that we could package a product together and call it Chattanooga Whiskey, and that we could tell a story around that. And we knew it would be a challenge to explain to people that it was illegal. And so, like, that the reason that the whiskey that they're drinking that's called Chattanooga Whiskey is not made in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is because it's illegal. And that's why we started a campaign called the Vote Whiskey campaign, because there were so many people that were just so confused. But we were originally, a non-distiller, and we told that story through that package, and that package was a means to an end. That package in that whiskey was a means to an end to go up and, produce it in Marion County or some other county. It would have lost, I think, a lot of steam.
So let's talk about that whiskey, that package that was the means to the end. When you started Chattanooga, the distillery, where did you turn to start to put? Where did you turn to get the first whiskey that you were going to bottle? What was the process like, and what was the reception to you putting out Chattanooga whiskey that wasn't distilled in Chattanooga, that was from somewhere else?
So when we announced that we were bringing whiskey back to Chattanooga, we announced it on Facebook. That's how we started the company. We started the company on Facebook, basically. And we wanted to tell the story. So we tried to make it as authentic and historical as possible. And 1816 was that was the date of the first community in Chattanooga, prior to Chattanooga actually being incorporated in 1838. And so kind of like Chattanooga Whiskey was not actually Chattanooga Whiskey, right? So the packaging was nice, and it told a nice story, and the local media got behind it, and Facebook was pretty unfiltered at the time. There's no algorithms or at least the ones that there are now. So it was a big conversation. There were a lot of people chiming in, and we were able to kind of just be unfiltered in our message, because it was just a couple of young gunners just starting this thing up. And in that conversation on Facebook, and we would reveal the label and be like, this is what it's going to look like, and we'd have the glass. This is the glass we're going to use, and this is the cork we're going to use, and we would just be, it was just a constant evolution, and people were just getting more and more excited about it, and the media was picking it up. And there were not a lot of third-party manufacturers. MGP was one of them, Lawrenceburg Distillers of Indiana at the time. And we got a few samples in, and we really loved the MGP sample. Thought it was absolutely delicious. And it was a 3-year bourbon. And this is what we wanted to launch with. We were very transparent all along the way. And I think the few of the handful that followed us closely, they knew that. And then, of course, there was the larger population that didn't know, because maybe they weren't following us as closely. Well, when we had a launch party in 2012, we had over 1,000 people show up to the launch party, and we thought it was a huge success. And in the launch party, we had a Kickstarter campaign, and the Kickstarter campaign was to help raise funds to be able to change laws. And so we stood in front of everyone, launching Chattanooga Whiskey 1816, made in Indiana, saying, let's bring whiskey back to Chattanooga. And so, we always had our haters, and we always had people that were saying, we don't understand why it's made in Indiana. And in that, but the momentum and the energy was still there. I mean, the locals wanted it back, and the locals generally supported it. Like I said, we had a handful of accounts that didn't want to pick it up because thought maybe we were just capitalizing on the name, and occasionally we'd have people write articles online that said, Chattanooga whiskey is BS. And we would always face those things head on. And because of our level of transparency, we didn't have anything to hide. And so we would always, we'd be talking about it. I remember one day we took the bottle of 1816 and we circled "Made in Indiana" on the bottle in red, and we posted it on Facebook. And we had, like, at the time, we had, I don't know, several thousand followers, maybe more than 10 or 15,000 followers. And there were so many people that were like, "What?" We're like, "We've been trying to say this the whole time. You guys aren't paying attention. We literally have to do something this extreme for you guys to actually know that we're trying to change the laws." And that's when Joe and I were sitting on my back patio one night, and we just said, we got to come up with something that's, like, louder, that to let people know what we're trying to do. And that's where, in just a short brainstorm with whiskey and cigars, we came up with Vote Whiskey, and Vote Whiskey definitely got people's attention. So.
And that transparency of where the whiskey came from was really important to you guys. But even now, there's a lot of source whiskey out there. There's a lot of people that don't like source whiskey just because of the stigma around it, even though in some respects it's very good. And there's a lot of stories, maybe not exactly like Chattanooga whiskey, where you have to change the law, but it takes time to age whiskey. Like, by definition, it's going to take time. So you have to, in order to get to that point, you have to be sourcing or be selling something else. But so what's next? So you decide to do Vote Whiskey. You get the community around it. How was that? Was it harder than you imagined it to be?
Yeah. So we started campaigning the county and just trying to figure out how the laws read, because they were prohibition era laws. So they went back a long way, and it was very confusing. We even had the Tennessee State Attorney General give an opinion on it, and we thought the opinion was going to be favorable, but it turned out to be not favorable. We thought we were going to be able to that the county was going to be able to adopt a 2009 bill from a Tennessee bill, and the Attorney General said no. These are going to have to be new laws, basically, but that we still needed a supermajority from the county to move forward. So we ended up having to lobby the county and then lobby the state and form new bills. And we were met with a lot of headwind, a decent amount at a local level or at the county level, and then even more at the state level because of a local legislator that was in the Tennessee General Assembly. And so it was definitely, I want to say the bill passed on, like, the last day of voting in the Tennessee General Assembly in 2013. So it was really tight, really, really tight. And we even had a distillery that opposed us, and that's a whole story in and of itself. And it was not a local distillery, but it was in Tennessee, and it was not Jack Daniel's. But so it ended up taking longer, and but when it passed, it made it all worth it, because because we had put in a big effort, and we had several local investors that were lined up ready to back us because of all the noise that it made, and it was exciting. And so that was our ticket to building our distillery. And then we had a co-founder split, and our plans changed. We went from, the distillery that we wanted to build to a much smaller operation and hiring a head distiller in that process. And that was when Grant McCracken came on board. So our plans didn't really, it never really went according to plan to a degree. I mean, we wanted to change laws and we changed laws, but it took a lot longer. We wanted to build, we had already a vision and a distillery, a location that we picked out that we wanted to build a distillery at. And we had a big party around it. We had several thousand people show up to the party for the announcement. And we didn't go into that building because it didn't work out. My co-founder and I split. So we ended up having to kind of back up and reset and do something smaller, which was and hire in a head distiller, which was the best decision I think that ever happened in the company, not the best decision. I shouldn't say that, but maybe the best thing that ever happened to the company was that period of time and the decisions that were made around that to kind of reset and take a different look at things and just get our feet planted. And that's when Grant challenged me to look at bourbon whiskey in a whole new way. So it happened, pretty organically, but through a decent amount of hardship.
Now, you mentioned that you and your partner split and he's no longer there. What was that like? I mean, that changes the dynamic of the company for sure, but what was that like for you? You're at the top and there's no one else to turn to. What was that like for you while you're going through all this? You said you're trying to get a new building and you're trying to expand while things start falling through, while you are dealing with losing your business partner here. What was that like for you?
Oh, I mean, it was very stressful. And our team, we had several original team members that kind of moved into this kind of new era with us, and we had a handful of team members that did not, and it was extremely challenging. There were definitely moments along that path that I thought this was the end, and that I wasn't even sure I wanted to continue to do it. I didn't want to continue to. There were a lot of times where I was not interested in continuing on with Chattanooga Whiskey. But we had great investors, and Grant coming on board was really exciting. And him coming in and us building something was really exciting. And once we started building the experimental distillery and we started and I was able to spend time with Grant, brainstorm with Grant. And we also had we had other core team members. Our creative director was our first hire. He's still here. He's still our creative director, and he's one of my best friends. And he's been critical to our success. So, and then around that time, we had brought on our sales director, and, he's one of my best friends, and he's still our sales director. And so there were still elements from an investor perspective and from an employee or a teammate perspective. And then with the addition of Grant and just building something, building a distillery and getting the still in and that vision coming together, that really drowned out, a lot of the turmoil and the stress, and felt like a real reset. It felt like we were, okay, we're back on the tracks, but this is a kind of a new set of tracks that we're on. And then in the belief in what we were doing and the belief in the vision was still really strong from everyone, which was amazing to see, even though we were building a 3,000 square foot distillery instead of a 30 or 50,000 square foot distillery. And the investors gave us an opportunity to kind of said, hey, look, if we execute this plan on this smaller distillery, then, let's keep going. And we did. We did it really well. We did the small distillery really well. Grant was an amazing hire, and everybody believed in the vision, and everybody was on board. And we built, a 50,000 square foot distillery on the Tennessee riverfront about 2 years after we established the experimental distillery.
Now, I want to talk about the experimental distillery in a second, but 2013, you pass the whiskey bill passes and you're able to start distilling whiskey in Chattanooga. And I'm sure Grant was a big part of this, but what was the process of coming up with your own recipe? Because I know now you have the Tennessee high malt whiskey, which is different than what you were getting from that you were sourcing from Indiana. So what was the process of coming up with your own recipe, and why high malt?
Yeah, so that was Grant's vision. Grant was a head brewer at a prominent craft brewer that became a worldwide brewer, and he was head of their R&D, and he's developed many recipes for them. And his specialty was working with specialty malts, and he felt like we could really make our mark on the industry and on straight bourbon whiskey, or whatever, on American whiskey, by crafting our own unique style of straight bourbon whiskey utilizing specialty malts. And because the distillery, the experimental distillery, was 100-gallon pot still and 3 100-gallon fermenters, we could only produce 1 barrel of whiskey a week. And so he wanted to push the envelope by producing a new recipe every week, because he believed in our vision that this wasn't the only thing we were ever going to be doing. It was going to be more than this. And so that was the risk that we took. It was a massive risk to go from building up a multi-thousand case brand in 1816 reserve and 1816 cask that were 3-grain MGP recipe, to spending 2 years, just exploring specialty malts and bourbon. And the reason for that is because not just because of Grant's background, but Grant truly believed that it would make a deeper, richer, more complex whiskey. We had already decided on the very beginning we weren't going to do the Lincoln County process, and that we weren't going to do Tennessee whiskey as traditional Tennessee whiskey. We just didn't want to do that. So, but straight bourbon whiskey was our past, and so we did want to continue to honor that, and we did want to continue to make that. And so, yeah, we just got on this path of we took the risk every week making a new recipe, and by the spring of 2017, we had over 100 barrels, 100 different recipes, utilized over 100 different specialty malts, over 30 different yeasts, and we had a lot to choose from to rip the Band-Aid off of 1816 reserve and 1816 cask in that MGP recipe and make it real Chattanooga whiskey, the only Tennessee high malt. So, and it was in that path. We called that those 2 years, the 2015, 2016, 2015 to 2017, the road to Tennessee high malt, or the road to Barrel 91, because it was Barrel 91 that we selected to become our flagship after those 2 years. But that was our road. It was during that road that we coined and trademarked the only Tennessee high malt. And it was that road that led us to Barrel number 91, that led us to now Chattanooga Whiskey 91 and Chattanooga Whiskey 111 and 99 Rye. Well, everything we're doing. So,
was it a strategic decision to? It's branded as high malt, but it's kind of, I don't want to say avoiding, but it doesn't brand itself as straight bourbon. Was that a conscious decision because it's so unique?
Yeah, so it does. So because we make straight bourbon whiskey by definition, and when I say by definition, I mean the Tax and Trade Bureau, the TTB definition, mm-hmm. It's got to be on the bottle. So you can see straight bourbon whiskey on the bottle. And we want people to know that it is a straight bourbon whiskey because it is, and B, like, those are our consumers, right? I mean, our consumers are straight bourbon consumers. But Tennessee high malt, there's a lot more to it. And, if it was Tennessee whiskey, we could be making bourbon, but we'd be sending it through the Lincoln County process, and then we'd be calling it Tennessee whiskey, right? Mm-hmm.
And was there a reason why you didn't want to do the Lincoln County process? Because being in Chattanooga, is that something that you even considered?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about it, but the reason we didn't want to do it is because it's not us, it's not ours, and it's not the flavor that we're going after. We were going after kind of a darker, richer flavor, not a lighter, more mellow flavor, right?
Yeah.
So that's the reason that we were doing that. We wanted to take the flavors of straight bourbon whiskey and expand on that instead of, just trying to make something approachable that hopefully everybody will like. So, in our opinion, it deserved its own name. We're in Southeast Tennessee. We're very proud of that. And so we wanted it to be Tennessee something. It just couldn't be Tennessee whiskey. We didn't like Tennessee bourbon. And if we just call it straight bourbon whiskey, everybody knows that most consumers still think that bourbon comes out of Kentucky only. And so we didn't want that confusion. It's high in malt. So we just said, screw it. Like, we're making our own thing. So we're going to call it our own thing. And a lot of consumers don't know what Tennessee high malt is, but I'll say this, we've been highlighting it now since 2015. We've been selling it since 2017. Our flagships have been out since 2019. And there's a lot more people that know about Tennessee high malt today than they did 5 years ago. So and they like it. And so I'm glad we did it.
Now you mentioned that there's so many more people that know about Tennessee high malt. How is the growth of the company and the brand? Because I think even when I started learning about whiskey, and Chattanooga Whiskey was one of the first companies that I saw on the shelf because I live in Knoxville. I'm not that far away, so it's promoted pretty well here. But what is the growth nationwide been in the last year since you launched? A little more than a year since you launched the 91 and 111.
It's been tremendous. We stayed pretty regional, or very regional, for a really long time. We were only in Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina with 1816 Reserve and 1816 Cask all the way up until 2018. In 2018, we opened up Alabama. That was the last market we opened up with 1816. So we were in 4 markets total. And before launching Tennessee high malt. Once we launched Tennessee high malt in 2019, we started opening up states, and through 2020, we opened up several more states, and I think we finished 2020 in 12 states. And then this year, 2021, we're launching 2 more states, just kind of filling in the gaps, but we're still very regional. We're still heavily focused on the Southeast. We're as far west. Our western states, our furthest western states are Texas, which obviously isn't west, Colorado, and then we're starting to go into the Midwest and Illinois, Ohio, and now Indiana. But still heavily concentrated on the Southeast, heavily concentrated on, those now, upcoming 14 markets once we launch Louisiana. In 2020, the distribution grew by, nearly 70%. And most of that was not even just expansion. That was current market growth. So it seems that consumers are really enjoying Chattanooga Whiskey 91 and 111. They know it's a change up. Most of the people like the change up, which is good, obviously, for us. And there's a lot of people returning to it. And it seems like, even just getting into some markets now and this year and having some conversations with people, that it's kind of taken on really its own identity, which it is, but within the industry, and it's growing legs within the bourbon industry. And I would say Chattanooga Whiskey is one of the fastest growing American whiskeys / bourbons in the United States. It's really exciting.
And in the past year, a little bit more than a year, you launched the 91 111. And then since then, through 2020, which I'm sure was a challenge in itself, but it was also an extremely exciting year for you guys because you had more whiskeys that you were launching. Explain to me the challenges the past year has caused and how you were able to still pump out even more and meet the demand of the 75% growth that you've been saying that were already in your existing markets.
So when we built the Riverfront Distillery, we started laying down, I would relative to our operation and to what we've been selling, a lot of whiskey, and continue to do that. We continue to stay ahead of our sales. So each year, as our sales grow, we're producing more. So really, capacity is not a huge issue for us. We've got more capacity, but we're also running hard every day. We have 4 fermenters, 4 3,000 gallon fermenters. We have this place plumbed for 8. So we can double our capacity right now if we needed to. But that would be, if we did that, that'd be into the 100,000+ case brand, and we're not there yet. Not super far off, but we're not there yet. So we definitely have some room to grow, and but as 91 and 111 grow, we're always innovating. And so 99 Rye came out of, that was batch 007 out of the experimental distillery. So we were really excited to launch that, but we don't make a lot of it. We make 80% of what we do at Riverfront is the 91 recipe that makes 91 and 111. The other 20% is made up of a dozen other recipes, of which rye is included. So, the malted rye release was exciting because, we got a third SKU in the shelf set, and, but it's pretty small. It's heavily allocated. I mean, it's hard to find. We only do, 2,000 to 3,000 cases of it a year. So,
so you've mentioned the experimental distillery first. How many different iterations of things are you trying there every year? And how, like you mentioned rye, is that the only experimental that has become a main SKU that you've started producing more regularly?
Yeah, so we've done over 300 experimental barrels so far. And we've scaled up about a dozen of them, and rye is just one of them. So rye was the next one to be released at Riverfront, or scaled up and released at Riverfront, but we have several more in the making. So we've got a bottle and bond coming up that has several different experimental recipes that were scaled up at Riverfront. That's going to make up that bottle and bond that'll come out in 2021. So there's other things that are in the works that we have been working on for a number of years that we scaled up from experimental. And experimental, we've released more than 35 releases so far out of there, and there's grain to glass there at experimental, and most of the time those releases are limited only to the experimental distillery for those customers there, and to make that experience special. They're usually 1 to 5 barrels each, so they're pretty small. 5 barrels would actually be a big batch. So like this apricot brandy we just came out with was a 3-barrel batch. So they're usually really, really small. They don't last very long. They usually sell out in 1 to 2 weeks. So anyways, we're always innovating over there. We're always considering what we can scale up over here. But right now, I'd say we have our hands full, having scaled up about a dozen recipes to Riverfront.
Now, you mentioned the bottle of the bond. What is the future for Chattanooga Whiskey in the next year, the next 5 years? What is your plan going forward?
Well, to continue to drive deep into the markets that we're in is really important to us. Our sales team is out there braving COVID and being safe and continuing to try to spread the gospel of Chattanooga whiskey and talk about Tennessee high malt, because there's a lot of people out there that don't know what Tennessee high malt is. And so we've got a lot of work to do in our existing markets. We're going to drive deep into those 14 states for a while. And, for us, the goal is to continue to grow. So eventually maybe nationwide, eventually export. But Chattanooga whiskey, the only Tennessee high malt it's our core. It's what we do. We don't do anything else. We're not, a third party manufacturer, and, we're not working on any other spirits. So, we're all in on what we're doing, and we'll see what happens. I don't know. We're just going to keep doing what we do. We're very passionate about what we make and why it's different and why we think it's better. And that really drives us to continue to grow. And then we see the growth happening. It's very inspiring, and we want to continue to facilitate that for as long as we can.
All right. So my last question is, when you are sitting down to enjoy a glass of whiskey, what are you pouring? Doesn't have to be Chattanooga whiskey. It can be anything. What are you pouring?
I mean, last night I poured Chattanooga Whiskey 91 over a couple of rocks. Okay. And then the night, before that I had a Zoom. I'm Zooming a lot lately. The night before that I had a Zoom, and I was pouring, batch 17 apricot brandy and barrel finish. I've got at home, I have all the experimentals, 1 to 2 bottles of all the experimentals. So that's a lot between all those. And it's really, it's fun to explore. So I've got lots of things to explore within Chattanooga whiskey. If I want to keep it fresh, I can just keep it fresh without having to go outside Chattanooga whiskey. Well, and
that's a question for me. Is there ever been an experimental batch that has come and gone, and you're like, I really miss that?
Oh yeah, of course. And I'm always lobbying Grant to bring something back, but he's like, that's not the point, right? Like, experimental. It's here today. It's gone tomorrow. Oh yeah. I mean, we had so none of the 35 releases have been repeated at experimental, with the exception of scaling a dozen up to Riverfront. But those are even going to be a little different because it's a column and a pot doubler versus just a pot still. So it's just a different operation. It's going to taste different. Mm-hmm. But we scaled up a wheat high malt, which is delicious over here, and it was delicious over there. And when it was batch 005, and when it was gone, I was sad to see it go. Of course, I still have a bottle of it at home, so it's not I can still revisit it. We've done some finishes, like a grade A maple syrup finish that was absolutely delicious, that we probably will never do again. And it was really popular. And to this day, we still have people asking if they can get it. And we're like, no, sorry, it's gone. We did a coffee liqueur that I'm just dying for Grant to scale up. It was unbelievable. And we're talking about that, but if we scaled it up, it wouldn't be the same. It'd be a different recipe. So that one, we did a Tennessee high malt gin that was made from a high malt bourbon recipe, but had like all kinds of botanicals in it, and had kudzu, like a local kudzu in it. And it was finished. It was aged. It was a bourbon barrel aged gin, and it was aged in, high malt bourbon barrels for, I want to say like 9 months or something like that. And it was, I'm not a gin guy, but it was a delicious gin. Yeah. Probably because it was more, it tasted like a hybrid of a bourbon and a gin, but it was still very ginny. And there were a lot of gin drinkers that were blown away by it. They asked for it pretty regularly. I think this batch 17 apricot brandy barrel, they're Turkish brandy barrels, I think that's one of the best releases we've ever done out of experimental. It's really approachable. And it's a 3-barrel batch, so it's a little bit bigger. It'll be around for a second, even though, I don't know, it might be sold out in a week. It's been out for a week, and I think we're halfway through it.
Jeez.
I don't think we'll ever do that again. And it's absolutely, delicious. So I don't know, all the time we've got we have an American single malt that I'm really excited about. It was batch 008, and American single malt. I believe it was a 4-grain single malt, and we scaled it up at Riverfront. Back there aging. It's probably pushing 40 years old right now. We probably won't tap into those barrels until they're, at least 6 years old. So I'm really excited to see how that's going to come out. But I don't know. I could go on and on.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for listening. This is the first in a series of interviews with leaders in whiskey to figure out why they do what they do and find the stories behind the bottles. If you want to support the podcast, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on whatever platform you're listening on. It helps the show grow and introduce more people to the stories behind their favorite whiskeys. You're listening to Barrel Talk.